Yo, what's up Terrarians? A few years ago, Terraria YouTuber Gungnir attempted to beat Terraria using only the Wand of Sparking, but unfortunately was stopped by the mechanical bosses. But a few months after his challenge, the Wand of Sparking received a huge buff, most notably increasing its damage from 8 to 14. Will this be enough to let this starter magic weapon defeat Moonlord? Stay tuned to find out. The rules for this challenge are simple. I can only rely on the damage from the Wand of Sparking to defeat enemies. This means no intentionally damaging enemies by utilizing accessories, potions, mounts, armor set bonuses, or anything else. I'm not going to reset if I accidentally kill some creatures with dynamite while digging a hole, or if I accidentally bounce off of a boss with the King Slime mount. I'm just going to avoid damaging enemies with anything other than the Wand of Sparking, and just reevaluate each boss fight after the fact to see if any incidental damage would have changed the outcome or not. With that out of the way, let's get to the challenge. I start off this run in classic difficulty with a seed that has a guaranteed Wand of Sparking in the jungle, so I don't have to keep resetting until I find one, and I make my way over to the chest without killing anything so I can get a hold of my only weapon for this challenge as soon as possible. After that, it's down into the underground jungle for armor and the Ivy Whip, where I struggled for several hours before realizing I can turn on auto swing for all weapons, which I forgot because I haven't played Terraria in a long time. But after warming up and gathering the resources for my jungle armor and Ivy Whip, I'm basically set for all of the pre-hard mode bosses. Without even gathering any mana stars, I go right to fighting the Eater of Worlds thanks to the bonus mana from my armor, and the fight was a cakewalk. The Eater does almost no damage on classic difficulty and rarely even hits me, but this is when I noticed the limitation of the Wand of Sparking. The projectile does pierce, but only once, meaning it can hit a maximum of 2 times. This is when I realized the Destroyer would be one of the largest obstacles to completing this challenge, but I have plenty of time to prepare for that. Skeletron didn't provide much trouble either, as I summoned him with only half the night left and no arena and kill him in a little over 2 minutes. He did a significant amount more damage, but I had plenty of health. This is also where I started noticing that the Wand of Sparking's projectiles move slow enough to actually hit twice against Skeletron's head, which was a very good sign, since it meant my damage output was effectively doubled against large enough targets if my aim was good, which is when I started realizing that this challenge might actually be possible. The Goblin army gave me a bit more trouble though. Without any knockback and only the bare minimum amount of piercing, the Wand of Sparking was terrible for crowd control. The archers would pelt me from afar while the warriors kept me from getting close enough to kill them. I'm still in pre-hard mode though, and all of this has been done before with a pre-buff Wand of Sparking, so let's talk about my next goal. Before I fight the Wall of Flesh, I need to grind for some items, since it'll be a lot harder to do so once I enter hard mode. By this point, I had compiled a spreadsheet of every possible buff I could get to fight the mechanical bosses. So now it's time for a pop quiz. What accessory will provide the largest boost to my damage against the mech bosses? If you said the Sorcerer Emblem, then you're wrong. The Sorcerer Emblem provides 15% extra damage when added to a Wand of Sparking with the Demonic modifier, adding a whopping 2.4 damage before rounding. The Shark Tooth Necklace, on the other hand, provides 5 armor penetration, which is equivalent to an extra 2.5 damage before rounding against all enemies with 5 or more defense. So on top of the Sorcerer Emblem, I'll be using the Shark Tooth Necklace as well as the Stinger Necklace for an additional 5 armor penetration, but I won't be using it very often since I do not want to rely on the bees released by the Stinger Necklace for damage, so unless I can ensure minimal bees attack the boss or enemies, I will not be equipping the Stinger Necklace. For the 2 Shark Tooth Necklaces that I'd need, I grinded out several Blood Moons and got quite bad drop rates, taking twice as many enemies as I should have needed to get them both, as well as grinding for 2 copies of another item I didn't actually need that also took twice as many enemies as it should have taken, because in my quest for acquiring every possible advantage, I decided I'd even take advantage of the 20% damage from the Feral Bite debuff and grinded Cursed Skulls for 2 Nazars so I could shimmer one into a Megaphone and make the Counter Curse Mantra to deal with the random debuffs tied to Feral Bite, which would hinder my damage output, before I realized that Feral Bite is only an expert in master mode, and I just wasted a ton of time for nothing. I also cheesed the first 3 waves of the Old One's army with some block-swapped platform hoiks to gather 1 defender medal at a time, in preparation for getting the Apprentice's Trousers after defeating the first mech boss for an insane 20% additional magic crit chance and movement speed, as I'll be using a mixed armor set for maximum damage. The Ethereal Wyverns were simply too much for me to handle in Wave 4, so I didn't end up beating it. But it's not necessary to beat the game, so once I got the 5th Defender medal, on top of the 10 the Tavern Keep gives us to start with, I headed on to the next part of my preparations. I killed Queen Bee a few times for the honeycomb to make the Stinger necklace, again another pre-hard mode boss effortlessly dispatched by the new and improved Wand of Sparking, but after that there's not much left to do in pre-hard mode. Once I get the party girl to move in so I can get bacon from Pigranatas for the exquisitely stuffed buff, I get to work on the Elevator. And yes, it's pronounced Pigranata, not Pigrangata, because the N doesn't have the tilde above it. The more you know. I end up building a fairly over-the-top corridor to cheese the Wall of Flesh, since I simply did not want to deal with the short 16 block range of the Wand of Sparking while dealing with the wall's eye lasers and random spawns. And with that, I enter hard mode. If I can't beat the mechanical bosses before the night is up, then this challenge is over in the same place it ended before. So my plan is to use nearly every item, buff, and exploit available to us at this point in the game to cheese these bosses, with the Wand of Sparking as my only source of damage. My plan for armor is to use a mix of either an adamantite or titanium headgear. Our world ended up generating with titanium, so we will be using titanium headgear, along with mystic robes and meteorite leggings until I defeat the first mechanical boss and switch over to the apprentice's trousers. I will also be duping crystal shards to sell for money because the Goblin Tinkerer is an absolute scoundrel and will eat 20 platinum like nothing to get a few accessories reforged to menacing. But I'm not going to be using any item transmutation glitches that can just instantly allow me to skip all the progression, because that would just defeat the point of the challenge. The first boss I'm going to face off against is the twins, or rather just Retinazer. You see, Terraria has a 200 NPC limit, and if you fill every slot except for one and attempt to spawn in the twins, only one of them can actually spawn. But you only need to kill the last one for it to count, and since Spasmatism found it too crowded in my world to join us, I get to skip half the fight. I learned this method to skip the NPC cap from Mappy Gaming, by placing critters until it doesn't let you place anymore, at which point you should be at 150 NPCs in the world and can fill the rest of the cap with some target dummies. In this fight, Retinazer likes to keep a set distance most of the time, being just barely within range of my wand if I shoot nearly straight up and run away from Retinazer to lead him into my shots before giving us some easy shots as he attempts to dash into us. Once he enters his second phase, Retinazer's nice dash gets replaced by him shooting lasers at us from the side, which makes it a bit harder to damage him as I dodge and weave around the lasers. Overall though, this fight was quite easy, and I could have probably managed both of the twins with some practice. But after a quick break to pick up my newly unlocked Apprentice's trousers for their insane 20% magic crit chance, and fight a pirate invasion which causes me a bit of trouble because of the gun-toting pirates like the pirate captain shooting 50 bullets in the time it takes for my magic projectile to reach them, I move on to Skeletron Prime. I do the same NPC limit shenanigans, and this time the result is that our Chrome Dome pal spawns in without his numerous appendages. So I can focus all of my efforts into damaging him, and I really need to maximize my damage. Luckily, without his arms to harass us, I can easily no-hit this, and safely use my Stinger necklace for some much-needed armor penetration. One of the greatest issues with this fight is that when he's not spinning after you, Skeletron Prime is floating above us completely out of my range. And when he is spinning, his defense shoots up from 24 to 48. As the clock hits midnight and I realize I'm not quite halfway through his health bar, I start to really put in the effort to damage him between his spinning attacks, and this fight ends with 41 seconds to spare before daytime. Lastly, for the mechanical bosses is the Destroyer. With 80,000 HP, the Destroyer has nearly triple the health of Skeletron Prime. If this run was going to fail anywhere, it'd be here. But luckily I can make sure the Destroyer is within range to hit for most of the fight. Typical cheese strategies involve making a safety box 50 blocks above the ground, but if the Destroyer is too far below me, then I can't hit him, so through trial and error I found that 47 blocks allows me to reach him consistently, and for the Destroyer to only sometimes reach my box. NPC cap shenanigans could help to stop probes from spawning, but with the Destroyer being comprised of 82 segments, if I fill the NPC cap -1, then the Destroyer will just be his head, a single tiny segment that's nearly impossible to hit, and it's a lot harder to make sure the NPC cap is full -82 than full -1, since target dummies lose their collision when the cap is reached, allowing me to just remove a few to be sure I have as many as I want. So I skip that, set up some heart and star statues, some honey, and leave a 1 block gap with a bubble block to shoot through to minimize lasers shooting back at me, and start doing attempts where I realize I can tank the drones well enough and that the bees from the stinger necklace weren't making their way out of the box down to the destroyer, so I did not have to give up the much needed armor penetration. Thanks to a lucky falling star, my first attempt nearly succeeds, but as I had used the hook to center myself above the hole, just 10 seconds before day as the destroyer was on 1000 HP, my hook came loose and threw me off to the side, and 10 seconds later the destroyer despawned. After taking a quick detour to fight a corrupt mimic for a putrid scent to add to my accessories for more damage, I did the fight again, and this time I was able to win with 20 seconds left until day. The falling star did deal about 1900 damage, and probably 100 damage was dealt by bees on a few occasions when the destroyer barged through my not-so-safe safety box, but with 20 seconds left in the day, my DPS was more than enough to have been able to finish off the fight without the extra damage. So I didn't really rely on that to win the fight, and for that reason I'm taking the win and getting ready to fight Plantera. With mechanical bosses out of the way, I no longer have to worry about a time limit, so I can swap some damage accessories out for movement accessories, so I get myself a pair of butterfly wings and upgrade my spectre boots to lightning boots, as I'm searching for Plantera's bulb. I build a simple arena consisting of a tall, somewhat narrow box, and my first attempt at Plantera reminds me of the spiky balls, and so I tried to bring the fight to the top of the box and put a few blocks to catch myself. But after entering Plantera's second phase, my on-the-fly adjustments and inexperience led to my death, so I brought in my heart and star statues, fixed up the platform up top, and my second attempt worked out with the tall chamber giving me a break from the spiky balls in the first phase until they all settled down and despawned. And with the upper platform helping me maneuver around and heal up, the rest of the fight was a breeze, taking 9 minutes and 48 seconds. Now, moving on to the jungle temple to fight Golem. I speed through and give him a test run, trying out a few different ideas for preparations, and realized that despite a good-sized Golem arena, I was still struggling as he slowly whittled down my health. So I take a break and go back through the options I have for gear and decide to grind out a set of Spectre armor. The hard mode dungeon is tough, and I die several times as the Wand of Sparking is too slow, short range, and weak to deal with the new mages and tactical skeletons while dealing with everything else. But I eventually gather enough ectoplasm so I can try out both armor sets. The hood was absolutely not worth it in the slightest, but despite a fairly large trade-off of 17% crit chance from my previous armor set for only 4% more magic damage, the set bonus made every one of my hits get to hit a second time, which doubled my DPS, as well as giving us 10 more defense. After crafting up some bone wings with the bone feather I got from the dungeon and a quick distraction with the solar eclipse, I quickly try fighting Golem again, only to lose because I suck, and so I go through the accessories I was hoarding and make a Charm of Myths so I can heal a bit more before heading back. I also was able to set up the heart statues beneath the Golem arena, outside of the jungle temple, thanks to heart reach potions, and defeat Golem in 10 minutes and 38 seconds. At this point I have completed pretty much all of the item grinding, and all I have left is the endgame. I start preparing some methods I thought of to try and cheese Moonlord and gather some buffs for the final fights. Max out my health and build the Sorbet Cafe setup for cheesing the lunatic cultist, but instead of a solid wall of blocks between me and him, I leave a 1 block gap since the Wand of Sparking can shoot through it, but his attacks which collide with blocks can't. I struggle a lot with the copies and end up dying a lot, but over time I get more and more accustomed to the fight. One thing which helped was that the lunatic cultist clones aren't random, but dependent on your position relative to him, and it can never be the one on the left. Ordinarily, this would mean that it should be consistent when teleporting back and forth, but I found that being directly below him in the center seems to change which one it is depending on how frequently I teleport, or if I step out a few seconds before to grab some hearts from my statues before centering myself back to the same position with my grappling hook. Ultimately, this just meant I needed to stay on my toes, and after a few hours of attempts, I eventually managed to win despite a brief scare at the end as I hit the wrong clone. But as the lunatic cultist was on 1 HP, this did not turn into a disaster as I quickly turned to hit the real one, and the fight ended after 23 minutes and 57 seconds. The pillars with a wand of sparking were the cause of a large number of my deaths. I started with the Nebula pillar and found that only the brain sucklers were worth targeting because of their much lower health, and I eventually grinded enough down to take out the pillar after an hour, 3 minutes, and 50 seconds. The next was the Vortex pillar, which was easy enough by boxing myself in and shooting up through a 1-block gap, taking only 22 minutes and 25 seconds. After that was the Stardust pillar, where I managed to catch a star cell in a box and kill it 100 times, letting me finish the pillar in 28 minutes and 57 seconds. Finally arriving at the Solar pillar, where I created a one-way wall box to catch enemies in, to shoot at safely, taking out whatever I could get my hands on, finally bringing the pillar down after 1 hour and 53 seconds. At this point I crafted a celestial sigil from the pillar fragments and made a backup of my save, as I had no intention of fighting the lunatic cultist and pillars all over again, as that would just be painfully tedious, and this next part is already going to be tedious enough as it is. But at last I've arrived at the final boss of the game, so now it's time to go over my preparations. In order to defeat the Moonlord, I have 2 major obstacles in my path, his damage and his healing. I tried the old strategies for cheesing Moonlord that I found on YouTube, but none of the safety boxes worked to stop the big laser, and I found that only if I had 3 blocks of open space above my head up to Moonlord's eye would Moonlord's giant laser not go through blocks. In addition, being trapped in a box meant his tentacle would grab me and allow Moonlord to heal. In any other playthrough, you'd either outdamage this healing, or kill the Moonleech clots that follow the tentacle from the player before they reach Moonlord's mouth to stop him from healing in the first place. But I don't have the damage for either of those options, so the plan was to outrun the tongue. By utilizing a long asphalt bridge with teleporters on either side, I had planned to run away and have Moonlord run into my attacks with his hands, faster than 82 miles per hour to outrun the tongue. Then, after taking out the hands, I'd go to my elevator, where I'd fall with the King Slime Mound while firing upwards, teleporting back to the top to continuously fall. And lastly, I'd use a platform hoik method to go up and be able to shoot down through it to match the tongue's speed, staying just barely out of its range to kill the heart. And all 3 of those plans failed spectacularly, as Moonlord himself was too slow to run into my attacks even 10% of the time, and some of his attacks were still fast enough to hit me, so my only choice was to use the nurse to heal the Moonbite debuff and damage, or fight even more tedious late game hard mode bosses for hours on end to get better mobility and be able to simply outmaneuver all of his attacks. I went with the nurse cheese, but the battle still had several issues. First off, the eyes on the hands were barely ever in range. I found that I did more consistent damage to them by relying on the set bonus of my armor to auto-target them as I shot the eye on the Moonlord's head than I did trying to shoot them directly through the one-way walls I put on my quite perilous safety box. And so I even intentionally let him heal, since the health all went to the forehead eye, so I could use it in order to take out the hand eyes. The fight dragged on for a long time, with 50 defense on the forehead eye and 40 defense on the hand eyes. My damage was severely reduced, but after some time, I finally opened up the heart. The Moonlord's heart has an insane 70 defense, which reduced all my damage to 1, which meant this would take insanely long, so I decided to give up for the day and try again after a good night's rest. After going through my spreadsheet, optimizing my damage, including utilizing a secondary chamber for the heart that's more enclosed, allowing me to use the Stinger Necklace without the bees damaging Moonlord, and bringing a ton of buff potions to ensure they lasted the full fight, I was able to bring my measly 1 damage per hit up to 3, and sometimes more thanks to the random damage variance and critical hits. I had done everything I could and was now on to the final challenge, a battle of endurance against the Moonlord. When I finally opened up the heart, I'd count 16 shots, right-click the nurse, wait for the debuff, heal, return to shooting, and repeat. The longer it dragged on, the closer I'd get to making mistakes, healing too early and losing count, and almost missing the debuff. Despite cheesing the boss, the fight was still incredibly intense, since failing for 1 second could set me back several minutes. But in the end, I was able to hold out. All 3 eyes combined took 28 minutes and 32 seconds. The heart alone took 50 minutes and 3 seconds for a total of 1 hour, 18 minutes, and 25 seconds. As the credits roll, I breathe a sigh of relief. After over 50 hours and over 100 deaths, I've beat Terraria with only the Wand of Sparking. If you'd like to see more content like this, then please subscribe. I plan on making more Terraria content in the near future. If you'd like to support me in making more content like this, I have a Patreon link and some crypto addresses in the description. I enjoy pushing the limits of games, doing crazy technical stuff, and generally doing challenges and stuff that require a lot of thought and careful planning. I hope you all enjoyed and will continue to enjoy my content. Thank you all for watching, and God bless.